They say that a magician never reveals his secrets, but thankfully the only magic I dabble in is over on the mana logs. So here's how Silhouhatte Rabbit works. If you summon 2 effect monsters, you have access to Silhouhatte Rabbit. Whether you get those monsters on the field with an engine, stealing your opponent's stuff, or with spare bodies you have lying around, it doesn't really matter, so long as they have an effect, you can use them for Silhouhatte's Link summon. And after it's brought to the field, you just have to activate the odd summon effect of your rabbit, which can set a continuous trap card from your deck. This might seem like a dangerous effect to have on a generic Link too, but you won't be setting a floodgate with this effect, because the continuous trap you choose has to be able to summon itself as a monster. This effect seems pretty inconspicuous at first, because you can't use that trap as an extension the turn you set it. However, certain trap monsters have surprisingly powerful ways to interact with your opponent, and they've only just now been able to shine due to Rabbit making them so easy to get to. But the card you'll likely see most with Silhouhatte Rabbit is a Silhouhatte Trick. So, after you set your trap card of choice, you just get to pass back to your opponent and wait for the perfect opportunity to perform your magic trick. Because if your opponent brings out a powerful combo enabler, or even activates a strong spell or trap card that will remain on the field, you can make their effects disappear. All you have to do is activate Silhouhatte Trick, because after you summon it out, you can then activate its on summon effect and negate face-up cards your opponent controls, equal to the number of illusion monsters you control, and both Rabbit and Trick happen to be illusions. But that's not the only trick up their sleeve, as on the same chain where you use Trick's effect and negate, you also get the chance to use the other effective Silhouette Rabbit to pop an opponent's back row. So with any 2 effect monsters in the game, you get a way to negate any 2 of your opponent's face-up cards, a back row pop, and even a free body that you can use on your next turn to further your plays. But let's see what's behind the curtain by looking at the engine's ratios to see how real this magic actually is. One of the most powerful things about Rabbit is just how little you have to commit in order to make the engine work. Not just because it's so easy to summon, but also because you don't need to surrender that much deck space to include it as part of your strategy. You just need 1 spot in your extra deck for Silhouhatte Rabbit, and 1 spot in your main deck for the trap card of your choice. You could definitely play more copies of Rabbit to use this effect multiple times over the course of a duel, or you could include a ton of different continuous trap monsters so that your Rabbit can adapt for every situation and strategy. But part of why this engine is so appealing for even meta decks is just how low the deck cost is for what you get out of it, as it can add a whole extra layer to an already oppressive end board, or give you a way to convert stray bodies into something useful after you've been hand trapped, which puts Rabbit in a very similar position to equally as strong generic Verte Anaconda. But while your choices with Verte were pretty limited, you have a whole host of different fun, interesting, and even silly options you can pair with your bunny. But before we get into those choices, let's take a look at the star of the show, Silhouhatte Rabbit. Whenever Rabbit is Link summoned, you get a chance to set a continuous trap card directly from your deck, so long as that trap has an effect to special summon itself as a monster, with the only downside being that you can't use Rabbit as a Link material for the rest of the turn. This is the part of Rabbit that recently revolutionized how trap monsters can be used in the metagame. You see, while there have been quite a few competitively viable strategies over the years that have used trap monsters in some capacity, they've rarely been used generically, especially continuous trap monsters. And it's not because these traps have terrible effects. On the contrary, some of them have incredible interactions that, when used at the right time, can be game-winning. But because you have no way to easily get to these traps other than just drawing them, you're better off playing other, better generic trap cards that could either deal with the field of monsters, or just floodgate an opponent out of the game. However, Silhouhatte's effect opens the door to a ton of fun experimentation for these trap monsters with how generic Rabbit is. Needing only 2 effect monsters so you can grab a continuous trap monster of your choosing has turned these cards from almost inaccessible to some of the easiest cards to get in the game, allowing for traps that previously would have been looked over to actually seem quite appealing. Especially because Rabbit being on field strengthens these trap monsters with its other effects. This effect can be triggered whenever any card in the spell and trap card zone is special summoned to the monster zone, and lets you use Silhouhatte to pop an opponent's spell or trap card. So, even if you use Silhouhatte's first effect to set a trap whose only effect is to summon itself as Vanilla Beatstick or Defender, you still get the chance to put pressure on your opponent by dealing with an important back row piece or interaction because you just so happen to summon Metal Reflect Slime at the right moment. Notably, this effect also doesn't need a trap monster to be summoned specifically. It can trigger from any card so long as it was in the back row first, which gives you the chance to use this effect in or against the likes of Centurion or even Snake Eye, since both strategies are quite capable for bringing out their monsters from the spell and trap card zone, which gives you the chance to use the trap monster you set preemptively so you can use Rabbit's Pop at a later point during the turn. And of course, like most illusion monsters, if Rabbit battles an opponent's monster, neither monster can be destroyed by that battle. This is a great bonus effect to have in general, but is even better on Silhouhatte specifically because it means that it's a lot harder for your opponent to remove it from the field with the battle phase, ensuring you get the chance to use Silhouhatte's back row pop and making it more likely it'll stick around long enough for you to use it as a link material on your following turn. But this protection, as well as its typing, is also incredibly important for another reason, as it means that it synergizes even better with the trap monster that was designed for it, Silhouhatte Trick. And that's because Silhouhatte's Trick negation relies on the number of illusion monsters that are currently on the field. When you activate Trick, you summon it as an illusion effect monster with 1500 attack and 600 defense. It's still treated as a trap card while it's a monster, and it gains 2 effects while it's brought to the field. It has the classic illusion protection, preventing itself and monsters it battles from being destroyed by that battle, as well as its primary effect, which triggers when it's special summoned, which lets you target and negate face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of illusion monsters you control. And notably, both Silhouhatte Trick and Silhouhatte Rabbit are illusion monsters. So even if you're not running a deck that natively uses illusions, you can still play this package because at worst, Trick will still get to negate at least 1 face-up card since it counts itself. And if you still have Rabbit on the field, then you can negate 2. The fact that Trick can negate any face-up card is almost absurd, as not only can you negate your opponent's best monster-based starters, enablers, and boss monsters, you also have the chance to deal with their field spells, continuous back row, equip cards, and even floodgates, freeing you up from potentially oppressive game states. Now, you do have to be careful with how you time the activation of Silhouhatte Trick because it needs to summon itself first before it can negate, which means you won't get the chance to stop your opponent's spells and traps that have an effect on activation. And stopping a monster on summon effect is going to be difficult, but not impossible. You just have to use Trick to summon as a chain link 2 during your opponent's turn whenever you use an effect that would special summon a monster, so that on a new chain, when they try to use that monster's on summon effect as chain link 1, you can trigger Trick as chain link 2. This can sometimes be awkward, but either way, Trick is still a pretty crazy piece of interaction for stopping your opponent's plays. And when paired with Rabbit popping an opponent's spell or trap card, this small package gives you an absurd amount of interaction. But earlier we talked about the coolest part of Silhouhatte Rabbit being how it opens the door to using continuous trap monsters as a form of interaction. And there's a range of really powerful options for you to choose from even right now, with one of the best being Angel Statue Azurune. When Azurune is activated, it'll become a level 4 fairy effect monster with some respectable stats. But the strongest aspect of the card are its effects while it's a monster. Unlike Trick, Azurune can't negate effects. But if your opponent tries to special summon a monster while you control special summon Azurune, you can send a continuous trap monster you control that was special summoned from your back row to the graveyard to negate that summon and destroy the monster. Importantly, Azurune is able to send itself for this effect, which gives it similar utility to Solemn Strike or Judgment in preventing an opponent's monster from hitting the board. You can't stop effects like Polymerization or Emergency Teleport from bringing in a monster, as they don't give Azurune a window to stop the summon. But Statue can still negate any kind of Link, Xe, Synchro, Pendulum summon, or any kind of special summon that doesn't start a chain link, stopping your opponent from getting to their extra deck tools, outs to their board, and even their combo enablers when used at the right time, which can be downright cruel when you use Azurune to back up an already strong end board. Now, unlike Trick, which is a very reactive trap monster, to get the most out of Azurune, you have to be proactive with the card and summon it out pretty early if you want to prevent the summon of the likes of Black Witch, making it a bit more difficult to use Rabbit's effect to pop an opponent's back row. But even with this small downside, Azurune is undoubtedly a great choice for Rabbit, especially in the current format where cutting off access to certain link plays is paramount for surviving. And if your opponent tries to circumvent Azurune's interaction by using the battle phase to their advantage, they'll be met with a nasty surprise. Because if Azurune is destroyed by battle, you get to pop the monster that destroyed it, which means that no matter what, your opponent is going to be losing a body in one way or another. But if you want to deal with an opponent's monster that's already on the field, then you could try running a copy of Prey of the Gyragumo as your target of choice. Prey summons itself out as an Earth Insect with a respectable 2100 attack to the column that you set it in. And then, as part of the same effect, you can destroy an opponent's monster in the same column as your Gyragumo. It's definitely unfortunate that this pop is limited to only being able to destroy monsters in the column where you initially set Gumo, because it means that if you set it with a Rabbit, then your opponent is going to know where Gyragumo is, and can play around it by summoning to the other zones. However, if you already have Rabbit in the extra monster zone, you can simply set Prey to be under the other extra monster zone, so that if your opponent wants to get to their Link plays, they'll be forced to give your Gyro-Guma a chance to strike. And if your opponent has already committed a body to the field by the time you set Guma with a Rabbit, you can just put it in the same column as their monster to ensure you're definitely getting the chance to pop something. You could technically get something out of Guma's graveyard effect too if you happen to be playing Gate Guardian strategy, as on your next turn, after using Guma, you can link it off so that you can use the search effect to grab your Gate Guardian pieces. Although if you really want to go all in on destruction, instead of summoning a huge insect that can only destroy one monster, you can bring out an angry girl to destroy an entire field with You're Finished. If you get a chance to summon You're Finished, then its effect, as a monster, can turn the tide of the duel on its head, as it's a quick effect that can destroy every card your opponent controls the moment they activate any card or effect, and after it's done wiping the field, you get to set it back in your spell and trap card zone to be used again on a later turn. This is an absurd effect to have. If your opponent doesn't want their board to be wiped, they're basically locked out of using anything, because the moment they do, you get a chance to Raigeki and Harpy's Feather Duster their entire board away, wiping away all of their on-field resources, which is often enough to win a duel on its own, or at least get a game-determinative advantage. However, there's one small issue with You're Finished. Unlike the other trap monsters we talked about so far, in order to activate it, 10 or more cards or effects need to have been activated in the same turn, and only then can you try to special summon it out to the field. Now, this condition definitely isn't impossible to fulfill. In the modern era, combo strategies are often going to go through way more than 10 effects to reach their desired boards, especially if they have enough to play through your interactions, hand traps, and boss monsters, which also count towards Your Finish's condition. But because it's really hard to use Your Finish to stop your opponent's early plays, it gives them a chance to set up their field before you get a chance to use it. And while that makes for an even better board to wipe, a Nightmare Phoenix or Little Knight in your opponent's extra deck means they're going to have ample opportunity to get rid of it before effect 10, which they're definitely going to do because they know you set it with your Rabbit. Although, not everyone is going to have room for these options in their extra deck. And if you get the chance to actually wipe your opponent's field, they're going to realize how finished they really are. Now, that just about does it in terms of powerful continuous traps you can throw into just about any deck to use as a piece of interaction or removal. There are definitely other generic options available that might have their use someday, like Mimesis Elephant, which can alter the types and attributes of any monster on the field, which can be really annoying for decks reliant on specific kinds of monsters. Or you could even try the recently released Kuwebiko to disincentivize your opponent from targeting your stuff. Or even Zoma the Earthbound Spirit if you feel like burning your opponent for 3000 damage when you go to the battle phase. But while these trap cards have their uses, they're pretty niche and need the right kind of format and game state for them to really pop off. And in most cases, it's probably a little bit better to set an easier to use continuous trap monster with a more applicable universal effect. However, if you're playing certain kinds of strategies, then you have even more options for what Silhouhatte can set that can specifically synergize with your deck or archetype of choice. Apophis the Swamp Deity is a really fun example of this. You can only special summon out Apophis during the main phase specifically, but on this same chain, you also get the chance to negate the effects of your opponent's face-up cards up to the number of other continuous traps you control. Now, by itself, Apophis is basically just a vanilla that doesn't do anything, because unlike Trick, it doesn't count itself as part of its negate. But if you happen to be playing a strategy that can swarm your field and back row with a bunch of continuous traps, then Apophis can act as a much more reactive version of Trick, which can even be used to negate cards your opponent has just activated, allowing you to counter the likes of Lightning Storm or Fiendsmith's Track as your opponent has activated them, or stop an opponent's on-summon effect that Silhouhatte Trick would struggle to deal with. The only issue with Apophis as a generic choice is that you need other continuous traps to make it work, which not every strategy can put up. So for most decks, if they want the negation, then Trick is their best option. But for strategies like Eldlich and even Centurion, a deck with monsters who can be treated as continuous traps, Apophis is an amazing reactive choice. And speaking of Eldlich, Rabbit's effect synergizes with the deck incredibly well because it just so happens that Eldlich's main form of interaction is through its continuous trap monsters. Conquistador, Hackero, and even Guardian all have effects to summon themselves out to the field as monsters. And then as part of the same effect, if you control Eldlich, you then get to do something else. Guardian reduces the attack of a monster to 0. Hackero can banish a card from the graveyard, and Conquistador can destroy a card on the field. Now, in a deck like Eldlich, you probably won't be summoning out Silhouhatte Rabbit on your first turn, But it's still a great option to have in your extra deck because it gives you a way to convert the bodies you use to interact with your opponent into free follow-up when you use them to link climb into Rabbit. The golden trap monsters are all normal monsters, so you have to bridge to Rabbit by linking away for Link Spider first. But Eldlich is more than willing to do that anyways, as getting your golden land traps to the graveyard lets you use their grave effects in the end phase to set an elixir back row from your deck, which is important for Lich because these elixir cards allow you to keep your main boss monster on the field, which turns your on-field trap monsters into real pieces of interaction. And if you link off your spiders for Silhouhatte Rabbit, you can guarantee access to those interactive pieces, allowing you to apply even more pressure to an opponent over the course of a duel, further increasing Lich's already strong grind game. But it's not just in Eldlich where Silhouhatte can get you to your engine pieces. In Crusadia, you could set Crusadia Crawler to get a search and a tribute for your Equimax negate, or you could set Shadow Core to fuse away into a control-based doll strategy. But perhaps one of the most interesting decks to use Silhouhatte is Time Thief, by using Rabbit to set a power reserve from your deck. Now, unlike the other trap monsters we talked about, Power Reserve isn't actually interruption by itself. All it does on field is special summon itself as a level 4 monster, and then bring out a machine Time Thief from your hand, deck, or graveyard. This could technically be interaction if you summon a Basil Ship to act as a DD Crow, if you manage to get your Redoer set up on your first turn. But the main reason why you'd want to try setting Power Reserve is so you can use it for an XC summon and get a trap card underneath your Redoer to use its effect to spin an opponent's card back to the top of their deck. This definitely wouldn't be worth trying if you had to wait until your turn 3 to get any use out of Power Reserve. However, being a rank 4 strategy means that Time Thief has an easy access to the Armored Xyz engine with their extra deck pieces, which can then be used to grab full Armored Xyz from their deck, a trap card which lets you perform an Xyz summon after you activate it as long as you control another Xyz monster. So if you combine this with Rabbit, setting Power Reserve from your deck, you can set up your plays by setting full Armored Xyz alongside it, so that when you travel to the future of your opponent's turn, you can use Power Reserve to set up the bodies you need for a rank 4 play, and then use full Armored Xyz so that you can summon a Redoer with a guaranteed spin during your opponent's turn, making the card much more of a genuine threat. And fittingly, doing this setup early will also reward you on future turns, as while it's in the graveyard, Reserve also has a second effect that can be used at quick effect speed if you have an Xyz with both a spell and a trap card as material, and lets you banish any card on the field, which is actually some crazy good removal, especially because it doesn't target. And Rabbit setting a Power Reserve turn 1 is going to make it much more likely you'll get to use its graveyard effect at some point. We've just about covered most of the interesting interactions that continuous trap monsters have available to them, but the pool is still rich for exploration and innovation with a number of different trap monsters that are going to be great options for more niche strategies. If you've dedicated yourself to playing a deck solely of trap monsters, then if you summon Rabbit, then you could easily grab a Statue of Anguish pattern to keep popping your opponent's board, or the classic with Tiki Curse and Tiki Soul to make your trap monsters really annoying to deal with. Or if you happen to be playing an Egyptian God deck, you could use Rabbit to set up a Metal Reflect Slime. This isn't interaction by itself, but it means that after you summon out your Metal Reflect Slime on turn 3, you can convert it into Egyptian God Slime to protect your other cards from being targeted while it acts as enough tributes to bring out the Winged Dragon of Ra, Almas the Tormentor, or Slifer the Sky Dragon. Now obviously this isn't the craziest card that you could set with Silhouhatte, but having the option to set any card from Metal Reflect Slime to Angel Statue Azurune showcases the sheer versatility of this bunny, which already has a ton of fun and strong options already available. And now, whenever a new continuous trap monster is released, instead of casting them aside as a fun but terrible gimmick, we can now appreciate the value that these kinds of monsters were intended to give, acting as both a way to interact with an opponent and a body that you can use on the following turn, all thanks to this silly Rabbit that showed us that tricks aren't just for kids.